Welcome to BYJU'S classes. We are back again with yet another edition of our weekly review of international events. And the past week also has been a fascinating week of events, some of long-lasting value, some of great potential for explosion in the near future, which might drag the world to another crisis, which might be very difficult to manage. All these events which we have carefully curated for you, as usual, we hope you would find interesting and useful for your preparation for international relations in the competitive exams. They will also help you understand Indian foreign policy, Indian diplomacy, India's national interest, not only political and strategic, but economic, cultural, etc. From our point of view, the event which was most unexpected and most dangerous was the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, one of the top, if not the top, nuclear scientists in Iran, in an attack covert operation conducted by what the Iranian government says terrorists, but they were foreign agents. He was traveling in broad daylight from Tehran to his in-laws through a very circuitous route, but obviously the cover was blown. First of all, there was a bomb blast which rendered his car immobile. Then a SUV riding assassins came and riddled the car with bullets and left Fakhrizadeh to die bleeding on the roadside. Now he has been accorded the honor of a martyr and the Iranians have vowed to avenge this, but we'll come to that a little later. This is not the first incident of this kind which has happened in Iran. If you recall, on 3rd January, one of the top-ranking Iranian generals, Qasem Soleimani, was assassinated by a US drone in Syria. He was targeted execution and he was also killed under these circumstances. Now there are two interesting differences and one similarity which we must keep in mind. Soleimani's assassination was in another country, not in Iran. And the argument which the US or Israel could put forward was that he was the head of the Quds, the covert operations wing of the Iranian secret services, and he had to be eliminated because he was mounting a terror attack in Syria. But nonetheless, the point remains that whether it was Israelis or the US of course took claim for this, were violating the territorial sovereignty of Syria. But this case, the case of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, is a blatant violation of Iranian territorial integrity, sovereignty, norms of international relations. What is even ironical is that the United Nations has come out with a statement that all sides should practice restraint and not take any action in haste. Now, if an aggression is mounted against a country by the covert operation, I see no reason why the charter allows that country the right of self-defense. So why should Iran be practicing restraint continuously? That's one part. So far, Israelis have not taken credit, or shall we say discredit accepted, of mounting this assassination. The spokesman on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu has said, I don't have enough information, my lips are not sealed, but I will share information with you when I do. But people have not forgotten that about 2 years ago, in 2018, Netanyahu had mounted a press conference and shown the pictures of this very low-profile nuclear scientist and told his countrymen, remember this name Fakhrizadeh, one day he will have to pay the price of being an enemy of the Zionist people. Now, what we must realize that this is the last days of the American President Trump. And American President Trump has been an extraordinarily close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, has given him support which was unexpected even by Benjamin Netanyahu. So Benjamin Netanyahu may or may not own up this dastardly act, but he stands to gain immediately because if Iran retaliates, it queers the pitch between happy relationship between Iran and Biden, the new president-elect. Now there is a longer background to this. The background is that Obama had during his presidency worked out a deal to remove the sanctions imposed by US on Iran. The only assurance he had to get was that the Iranians would give a promise that they would not build a military nuclear weapon. They would have their installations open to international agencies, and The world was expecting that the moment Trump is out of office, the transition is complete, Biden will resume this work. Another thing which we must remember, the United States of America is a very badly, bitterly divided nation at the moment. There is no general agreement about what the foreign policy objectives are, what there should be. We have been also listening to news reports that Trump had asked his advisors whether he should mount a strike against Iran to devastate their nuclear establishment once for all. Now, so there is a hardcore hawkish element in the American foreign policy, American Defense Department, which also support Benjamin Netanyahu's hardline hawkish stand, and they don't want Iran to either reduce tensions with US, benefit from reduction of economic sanctions, and maybe resume its nuclear program, which might be converted into a military program with very little effort. At the same time, what is the provocation for Israel or US to mount this attack is also because the Iranians might be trying to build up before the Biden comes to White House as much of progress on the nuclear fissile material, nuclear fuel, before the impositions are there. So that kind of nuclear, high-grade nuclear, weapons-grade nuclear would be available to Iran. So they were probably trying to finish it. But what this whole incident has brought out very tragically and dramatically is that the Iranian security establishment has been badly riddled by foreign agents. These two are not the only two incidents. Between January and this incident, there have been almost half a dozen incidents of accidents in nuclear installations, in power supplies, and Iranians have had to admit that they have been not accidents, they have been acts of sabotage. Now, if Iran values its security and strategic interests so highly, why can't it protect its top nuclear scientists a little better? Why can't Iran weed out the agents which have infiltrated in its nuclear establishment or its security establishment? Now, Iran is not the most open of the countries, but the problem remains that we'll never find out whether Iran punished people responsible for past lapses, but this is really the last straw on the back of the camel. Now we come to the last part of the argument. Iran might be rhetorically saying that it will give a fitting reply, harsh reply to enemies, but is it in a position to do so? Recall Qasem Soleimani's murder in Syria. Iran had a very calibrated diplomatic response. It fired a missile at American installations in Syria, giving enough notice Americans to move out the troops. There was hardly any loss of life, and some loss of property was there. In past, something of this kind has happened, and Iran has suspected that Saudi Arabia is responsible for this. They have launched missile attacks, drone attacks on oil installations in Saudi Arabia. So this blame game sharing, Saudis blame Iranians, Iranians blame Saudis, has been going on for a while. But what is tragic is that in the past few weeks, there has been a whole restructuring of the political relationships in Gulf and the Middle East. The Saudi Arabs have made up with the Israelis have made up with the Gulf countries, and also they have tried to rebuild this relationship where they are not adversaries, but interestingly, they are all Sunni Muslim countries, and Iran is the major Shia nation. So whether they would rally around a fellow Muslim, which is a Shia, is open to question. Now, Turkey has come out in support of Iran right away at the moment. But the interesting part is that in the past few months, Iran has also made it very clear that it has to export its oil, sell its oil. It has found another market in China, and it has been very sympathetic to the Chinese plans for the new revival of the historic Silk Route. So is America or is Israel pushing Iran deliberately into the lap of the Chinese? This is something which we have to bear very, very carefully. Another event which turned out to be a damp squib was the G20 summit in Saudi Arabia. Of course, one knew that due to COVID, the summit would not be physical, summit would be only virtual, but much was at stake for the chairperson, Saudi Arabia, for this summit. Mohammed bin Salman wanted to showcase the transformation of his feudal kingdom into a modern state. He wanted to emphasize that he had been vilified, he had been demonized ever since the murder in Turkey of an American journalist of Saudi origin, Jamal Khashoggi. He has been accused of being a spendthrift, he has been accused of presiding over a government which violates the human rights, but he has done things to symbolically make the world see that the women get a vote, women can drive, women can do this, allow malls, all that is apart, but these are cosmetic changes. But as long as he could not show this in a virtual meet, most of the interest which he had went out of it. Now, where it concerns us is that the Saudis had taken great trouble to interest India into this, and they had said that they would like to partner with India, a security arrangement and an economic cooperation arrangement which would give a new focus, a new momentum, a new direction to the G20. But before we examine these things more substantially, it is important for us to remember what G20 is. Now, G20 is a very odd collection. It is the collection of top economies of the world, so we don't have to refresh your memories about it. It has America, it has China, it has Japan, it has Germany, it has France, it has India, it has Britain, and it has, of course, Saudi Arabia. It has the partners of the Western world. It has Australia, it has Canada, it has Italy, it has Spain. But then if you count these, you would notice that not all of them are equally significant in international affairs. When you add them up, you come out with very interesting figures. There's trillions of dollars of economies controlled by these countries. This group, G20. It has so many members which are oil producing, oil exporting, etc. It also has Russia as a member. But then the point is that if you look at the membership closely, you also would have Brazil, you also would have South Africa, which in contemporary international relations have ceased to have any meaning. So when G20 was formed quite some time back, the idea was that this would be a multilateral forum which would provide opportunity to shape the agenda to countries which were not major players in international relations. They would combine together and do it together. But we would like to keep something else in your mind. Take United States and take Canada and take Brazil and take South Africa and take Germany and France, take Australia. Do you think that any one of these countries can afford to antagonize the Americans or the Western countries which control their trade, economy and so on, and take a position on the G20? Now the interesting part is this. At one stage when Mr. Modi had just been elected the Prime Minister, he used each fora to give the world an impression that the Indian diplomacy was moving into a new dynamic phase. He was getting to know the world leaders firsthand, and he did manage to give a new momentum to India's economic policy and diplomacy. But much water has flown since then. Now again, there are two things here which I would like you to keep in mind. Russia is not one of the major economies, but continues to be a major power. But Russia follows a strategic policy and an aggressive diplomacy which is not necessarily in consonance with the other members. It also is difficult to imagine that countries like Japan and South Korea can have a very interesting coordination of policy just because they are members of G20, because they are having a confrontation with China in the South China Sea, because they are having the Quads. And again, China has been trying to diversify its options by having the regional cooperation for economic in Southeast Asia, and it has its own plans. So ever since these other multilateral fora have come up, I would think that the significance of G20 has greatly reduced. Now the interesting thing is this, that I fail to understand why the Indian government doesn't realize or recognize that these multilateral fora do not make a difference to our national interest and our foreign policy now. There is a meeting of BRICS. Very soon India would have the chairpersonship. There is India's turn to be a chairperson of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But have a look at these. What is the BRICS? Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. South Africa and Brazil are not exactly the most important actors either economically or politically, and you have Russia and China, which do not necessarily have a coincidence of interest or shared worldview with India. So what are we hanging on to the fossil of the past? It made great sense 20 years back, 25 years back when IPSA was there, then BRICS came and you said it's a tricontinental partnership. But this was the heyday of globalization. Now when the globalization has almost unwound itself, there is no reason to hang on to these multilateral fora. Now again, if you discard SCO, you discard BRICS, take SCO. SCO has Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. Now, which one of these countries is of crucial significance for India? So, obviously, India can have a very happy bilateral relationship and accommodation with Russia. I don't think that we should even waste time on trying to do this kind of thing with China, because we are still on our banning spree of Chinese apps. Another 45 have been banned. So we cannot have it both ways. We cannot treat China as an enemy, and we cannot treat China as a long-term economic or strategic ally either. So the longer we take to identify China as an adversary, if not an enemy, we are going to pay a price, which is a heavy price in diplomacy. Now, this is what I would like you to keep in mind. The other extreme of Indian diplomacy again doesn't make sense to me. The Indian foreign minister has been very active. He went to Seychelles. Now, Seychelles is a small island off the coast of Africa with a population of 25,000 people. Our national security advisor goes to Maldives, which has a population of a little over 5.5 million people. But it is difficult to imagine that India's neighborhood policy is predicated on Seychelles and Maldives. We should be more worried about what is happening in Nepal, more worried about what has happened in Sri Lanka, more worried about what is happening in Myanmar, more worried about and concerned about what is likely to happen in Bangladesh. So the irritants continue. And we seem to be lulled in a false sense of security with our fascination with multilaterality. And there is always this talk that India might get its seat at the high table, it might get a seat at the Security Council, but all that is to keep India out of the major play. Many of the events all over the world last week were conditioned by Donald Trump's reluctance to move out of the White House. It had been prophesied that he would not move out gracefully. It's almost coming to that conclusion. Hardly 2 weeks remain before the Electoral College declares a winner in the vote. But he says that he will wait. He has not exhausted his legal options. He will go to the Supreme Court. He is slowly losing steam and interest, but this is affecting the world politics in a very odd manner. The longer he stays on in White House and the longer he delays Biden's transition into the presidential elect's chair, there'll be delay in Biden appointing his cabinet, having a discussion about the suitability of various people in the cabinet. Let's not forget that the Senate is very tightly divided, just 2 votes margin between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Americans do not always support the presidential nominations. They have local political considerations, they have old enmities, they have old rivalries. So the jockeying for a position of power has already started. But what Biden has done, he has at least nominated a few people like the Secretary of State, who is an experienced diplomat who had been a number 2 man in the Department of State. He has got John Kerry, who was at one time the Secretary of State, to hold another important position. He has nominated Afro-American of color to represent America in the United Nations, which again is one of the highest positions which the American career diplomacy can have. He also has announced his decision to appoint a Latino for Homeland Security in his cabinet. Now, you see, when we talk in terms of Biden's appointments or nominations to his cabinet, let us get one thing straight. American system is very odd. There are certain positions of power which require confirmation by the Senate. There are certain positions of very great power which do not require the confirmation by the Senate. One of them is, of course, the National Security Advisor. But the point is that you cannot have all these people who do not require confirmation by Senate and start working with their assistance. He has named a Secretary of Treasury, a very well qualified person, but the criticism has started. And how it affects countries other than America is this, that Americans have been waiting that how far will Biden go in going back on the rampage and destruction which Trump had done, how much of the Obama policies would be in a position to revive. And Biden himself has said this is not going to be the Obama administration repeat. This is going to be a Biden administration. So if we keep that in mind, the longer the transition takes place, the longer the world waits for the American assurance that America shall lead from up front. It should not neglect its role in international politics, and America's allies will not feel that they have been let down or left out. Now, this is, I think, partly the reason the assassination of the nuclear scientist in Iran took place. This is partly the reason which emboldens the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to play for high stake and like a gambler keep dangling the European Union peacemakers about the deal. It probably allows, for the same reason, the President of France, Macron, to take a stern line in context of his domestic political opposition about Islamophobia, etc. So, but ultimately, how would Americans respond to the threat of international terrorism in Islam? How would Americans try to be tolerant of diversity? Not like Trudeau of course, the Trudeau-Trump relationship was a very fraught one, but one doesn't imagine that it will change very drastically with Biden and Trudeau either. Because Trudeau also would have to face an election soon, and Trudeau also has to worry about his domestic constituency. For India, it would be worth waiting and watching what place Biden assigns to India in its worldview. Does it find India to be a more valuable ally in South Asia, in Southeast Asia? I don't think that South Asia is going to make much of a difference. Americans are not going to dismantle their relationship 6-7 decades old with Pakistan, which CIA has put in place. Afghanistan would remain a problem for them. Despite the talks in accord with Taliban, things are not going well in Afghanistan. India has no desire to step into this quagmire. So I think Indians at best can hope for Biden to give it the same kind of a support which Trump was promising in Indo-Pacific Rim, in Quad, in the joint exercises, and support India in its effort to resist China's pressure on neighbors in Southeast Asia, especially the ASEAN countries. The Nobel Prize winning leader of Ethiopia has declared its army has captured Mekelle, the capital of the northern province of Tigray, which was a rebel province which had threatened to fight unto the last man. And it says it's only a matter of few days when peace is fully restored in this region. At the same time, the Tigray People's Liberation Front leaders have made a statement that they have no intentions to bow down. They will fight to the last man to preserve their territorial integrity and their identity. Now, it is very difficult to imagine that even if the Ethiopian army is control of Mekelle, which is a city of about 500,000 people, this will bring peace to the region. Because right after this statement was made, a rocket was fired from northern part of Tigray to Eritrean capital, and explosions were heard and reported by foreign diplomats. Now, this seems to be a replay of the kind which we saw in Nagorno-Karabakh for weeks, that both sides would claim victory, claim having inflicted damage on soldiers and civilian property and so on. But ultimately, when the Armenians collapsed, it was a bit unexpected. So are we going to have a rewind of that kind of a conflict? But we don't even know if that is the end of the conflict there, or the truce will hold only as long as the Russian peacekeepers are there. So if we keep that thing in mind, Ethiopia is a country divided into 10 provinces. Provinces are mostly autonomous, governed by different tribes, and the president doesn't actually belong to the most populous tribe, nor do the Tigray. We have been reminding you of this again and again, that Ethiopia may have military might and muscle, But Ethiopia doesn't have the kind of economic resources to continue this kind of a warfare against its own provinces. There might be a beginning of a civil war strife, not only in Tigray, but from Tigray back again to Eritrea. The troops had got the Abiy Ahmed his Nobel Prize, but the problem is that we don't know what happens now to the Grand Dam, what happens to the development programs, what happens to hundreds of thousands of refugees which have moved over to Sudan and other neighboring countries, what happens to economic devastation, environmental damage. So I don't think that we can look forward with any degree of optimism to this part of Africa. On the other part, there is a lull. There is no report of fighting from Libya. But there is always a disturbing news item from Nigeria of Boko Haram killing people in dozens, the violence of the Islamic terrorists, macheting in Mozambique and so on. But point remains that the hopes of New Africa, Ethiopia, Libya, Nigeria, an oil exporting country, have been belied. This has only allowed outside powers to step in, and the fight is not going to end in a hurry. Call it a bottleneck, call it a stalemate, but one problem just refuses to go away and disappear is the Brexit. And at times one wonders, why is the European Union persisting with these negotiations? The EU envoy to negotiate a deal, the last minute deal with Britain, Michel Barnier, has admitted in private, he has been at this task for a period of over a year, that Great Britain has hardly made any meaningful suggestions which can form the basis of an agreement which is mutually beneficial and acceptable. As far as the British Prime Minister is concerned, he is very happy with a no-deal Brexit, because that is what brought him his party's leadership, that is what got him into the Prime Minister's chair, and that is what has allowed him to unleash a period of authoritarian administration which has played havoc with British parliamentary system, and he is not really worried about that. So European Union has an existentialist problem, because European Union even before the Brexit was having a problem of trying to manage its relationship with its poorer spendthrift members like Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, and also to manage the East European members who refuse to follow the norms and values of the European Union. And now Austria and Poland have just come out with the ultimatum that they would veto the budget of the EU. So EU cannot, without their consent, dole out assistance to less fortunate members of the European Union. Now, at one stage, European Union was very keen to expand its membership, but now it is having a problem. So now it also realizes, with this crisis there, with the problem of Islamophobia in France, the rise of left extremism against President Macron's policies about censorship of the press and media, is leading to a situation where Macron will have to worry about his opposition, both extreme right and extreme left, and take a stance in economic policies. France and Germany have to worry about their economies, worry about managing, allowing the structure of the EU to survive, and they would pay a certain price to keep Britain inside. Now, it is not as if that Britain doesn't have any crisis. If you look at Britain, earlier it was said that the Irish backstop was a major problem, because if there is an Irish backstop, and if the Republic of Ireland, which will continue to be a member of European Union, will have a barrier between it and the northern part, it will undo the Good Friday Agreement, and it would lead to a major crisis about the unity of United Kingdom. It is not only Ireland. It is also now the problem with Scotland and Wales. The Scottish minister in his parliament has come out with a statement that we want to go in for a referendum which allows us to secede or separate from United Kingdom. Now, if the United Kingdom doesn't allow this to happen, it has another revolt in its hands. And their argument, like Wales, is again the same, that their interests have been not looked after when Trump was the president of the United States and Britain was left to do its own thing in European Union and its domestic policy. politics. So Boris Johnson got away with a lot. So Boris Johnson kept telling everybody that as long as I have got the sovereignty of Great Britain back, nobody should worry about anything. But the Great Britain of sovereignty means one thing in England, another in Wales, another in Scotland, another in Ireland. So this is one part which is the existential crisis of the United Kingdom in Boris Johnson's administration. Now, the interesting part is this, that at times the statements are made that, major compromises have been made on differences like fisheries, like transport, residency rights, movement without passports. But let's not forget that these are easier said and done because fisheries has not been settled comfortably, at least as far as the French are concerned. And also, I think we should not forget that there is a very important clause which says that if in future any of the countries, either Britain or the EU, diverges in its policies about providing assistance to its farmers, services, etc., giving an unfair advantage to its services or produce, the other side would be forced to retaliate. Now, if you keep that in mind, it doesn't seem that there is any agreement whatsoever. There also is a problem that what happens to the elaborate structure of European courts, the courts of human rights, the trade settlement disputes. Now, Trump succeeded in demolishing the WTO totally. And Boris Johnson was more than happy having this happen. So he is just playing for time, waiting for this, that the Europeans will blink and they need Great Britain more than Great Britain needs European Union. We'll see how it plays out. But there is yet another dimension to this. Most people believe that not only the Tory party has a problem, but the Labour Party in England also has a division about Brexit. So first of all, there was Corbyn, whose anti-Semitic remarks got him into the doghouse. But now the leader also has a problem that he has had to instruct his frontbenchers that they should not automatically vote in favor of the Brexit deal. Now that's one part. Now the interesting play in this is that people think that the great gambler Boris Johnson he's waiting for the announcement of a emergency vaccination of the COVID vaccine. So it will give him a boost, give his administration a boost, and he could pump his chest and say that, look, I delivered and I think we can manage to do it. Now, the problem here is that for India there is a problem. We take it for granted that we have a great relationship with Great Britain, but ever since Boris Johnson has come, we haven't seen any signs of Boris Johnson making an offer to India which sort of would have compensated his loss of the European Union market, but it can't possibly because European market is next door and India is quite far off. Let's not be very naive about it. If it comes to military hardware, armaments, aeroplanes, submarines, let's also see that India has diversified its market. India has Israel, India has Canada, India has France, and these are not complementary markets at all. So what happens is the complementarities in economy between India, which was once a colony of Great Britain, and contemporary independent India and Boris Johnson's United Kingdom are two totally different things. So how the Brexit plays out is going to have an impact on us necessarily because we have a relationship with them which is very close, but I don't know whether we can leverage it to our advantage. We would like to point out a few things to you. As you must have noticed in this review of international affairs, the center of gravity seems to have shifted from areas of our priority interest in India elsewhere. First it was Saudi Arabia, G20 summit, then it was the problems of transition in America post-Trump era, then it was Tigray and civil war in Ethiopia, then it was Brexit, and then, of course, let's not forget the most important, most explosive development, the assassination of the nuclear scientist in Iran. Now, in neither case is India a principal actor. India was looking forward to playing an interesting role in G20, but that turned out to be a damp squid. And India has moved away, shrunk its relationship with Iran under American influence, persuasion. So there is little scope for India to do anything there. We dare not come out with open support, and also we cannot afford to antagonize Israel, but which is an important strategic ally for us. How does that affect us? My problem is that India's confrontation with China on the Himalayan snowy desert continues unabated. Our government refuses to name China as a principal enemy, adversary. We are making token gestures like banning a few social media apps, but we don't even know what is happening in the economic relationships in substantial terms. So I would suggest that we would have to worry about our immediate neighborhood, the Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, rather than where the world's gaze is fixed. So they may be fixed at Libya, they may be fixed at Saudi Arabia, they may be fixed at the restructuring of the relationship between Israel and Gulf countries. It may be about what is happening in Iran. But we have to worry about China, we have to worry about Pakistan, and not bracket Pakistan with American interests and Afghanistan. So we have to be very, very careful. Till we meet next week, we hope that you will revise these incidents, you will read up a little more to get the background, and if you have any questions, comments, keep in touch with us. Till then, goodbye.